Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar. Looking forward to today's content. As you know, those have joined us regularly. We have these ongoing events, and today we're going to focus on, as we can see, 911 legislation and compliance for state and local governments. It's great when we can bring topics that are important to our clients, and I think today's topic is going to do that. So Fletch, if you don't mind, we'll advance the slides and we'll get started. Also, as we do this, just know if you have questions, please do put those in the question or chat section. If we don't get to them today, we will answer those for sure. Those will be recorded, and we'll make sure that we reach out to you. Before we start, also to let you know, we are focusing the next two events on some of the more use case benefits and the feature sets available to you. So today we'll talk about the legislation and compliance, what it means to you, and we'll sort of progress down in the next couple events. All set, Fletch. So we'll have introductions in a moment. As mentioned, we'll talk about Kerrys Law and Baum's Act, and really have an open discussion of what it means for you out there in the field. How do we prepare for it? How do we execute on it? We'll talk about those things. We'll share what we're seeing out there, and at the end have some Q&A. All set, Fletch. I'm excited. We have Jake and Mark Fletcher joining us today, and he probably won't do it, so I'll give a little bit of a bio for Fletch if you don't know him already. Mark has, I think, 14 US patents covering next generation 911 call processing, and was the author of Kerrys Law, as well as a major influence on the Baum's Act. So we feel good about the knowledge and experience and skill set bringing to today's event. So we'll look forward to Mark and Jake here in a moment. All set, Fletch. So I know a lot of you already know the organization. That was by design. A lot of your account managers have reached out to you, so we won't go into too much of the new era, but for those who maybe don't know us, you can see we have 40 offices across the globe, 1,600 plus employees, and maybe more importantly, Fletch, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide, we'll see sort of the graphic of the core areas that we can cover. Today, we're sort of in the collaboration, security line safety realm, but just know from a new era perspective, everything that touches this initiative as well as the environment, everything from data networking to cloud to Microsoft services, New Era is positioned very well to be a support arm for you. All set, Fletch. So really neat. I think it's always important and nice to know perhaps where you sit compared to peers. So in the registration that you went through, we collected some questions, and here's some of the responses. So does your current 911 infrastructure notify relevant parties that an emergency call has been made via an organization provided PBX phone? So 60% of you are saying, no, we cannot do that. Question 2, does your current notification provide the location of the device that dialed 911? Again, almost 40% saying no, it does not do that. And then does your current 911 infrastructure allow for calls to be placed without the need for an external digit like a 9? Thankfully, everyone here is good on that one. Next slide, Fletch. When we dial 911 from an organizational PBX device, can you send the building address? So only 40% so far saying yes. And I think Fletch will go into detail. That's a pretty critical thing to have available to us. When we dial 911 from an organizational PBX, can we send the additional information that allows the calling party to be located? So less than 20%. Does your organization have multiple buildings or buildings with multiple floors that are listed under one address? And again, 60% yes. So another sort of key area to talk about. We want to make sure that we can very quickly determine where someone is without that confusion. So with that, Fletch and Jake, I'll turn it over to you guys to introduce yourselves and start the content. And again, really excited for this. So thank you in advance.
Thanks very much, Joe. We really appreciate all the folks at New Era Technology taking this seriously and bringing this out to their customer base. So again, I'm Mark Fletcher. Fletch. Joining me today is Jake Damphouse, who's our channel manager for the product. Jake, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Fletch. My name is Jake Damphouse. As he said, channel manager with 911 Inform. I've been working with Joe and New Era to try and just bring some awareness as far as this legislation that's coming down the line. And excited to talk with you today. Thanks, Mark.
So let's talk about Kerrys Law. Kerry Hunt was the one that really drove all of the existing legislation initiatives that are in place today. And I think it's important to understand the full story because as telecommunications people, we don't realize the impact that what we do or don't do can have on people's lives. So back on December 1st of 2013, Kari went to meet her estranged husband in a hotel in Marshall, Texas. She brought along her 3 children. And during that meeting, she was attacked by her husband and she was stabbed a total of 29 times. Now, her oldest daughter, Brianna, knew what was going on and actually tried to dial 911 4 different times from that hotel room phone. But the PBX, the MLTS, had been set up to require a 9 before any outside call, which required 911 to be dialed. And when her father, Hank Hunt, later that night realized what had happened and what had gone wrong, he started a change.org petition to try to get this changed because there was really no legislation that required 911 to be 911 behind a PBX. And that's where I got involved. I saw the change.org petition and I reached out to him to help him on this initiative. And I've got to throw a lot of thanks out to my employer at that time, which was Avaya, and specifically Kevin Kennedy, who basically pulled out all the stops to assist him with this. And today that change.org petition is probably one of the largest petitions they've ever had. And there are 578,000 signatures on there. Hank was looking for 100 to go to his local congressman, and he got a considerable amount more. Although it took 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days, that law did pass the House, the Senate, and I had the honor of joining the Hunt family in the Oval Office at the White House, where the president signed Kerrys Law into the law of the land. Now, a couple of things to remember. In December of 2013, no local law existed in Texas that required access to 911 from a multi-line telephone system. No legislation. There was no federal legislation. Nothing said that that hotel had to do anything beyond what they were doing. However, this situation was so tragic that when the Hunt family brought this in front of a local jury in a wrongful death lawsuit, they were awarded $41 million without any legislation on the books. And the reasons for that It was proven that the hotel knew about the problem. It was proven that they chose not to address the problem. And that met the criteria for a wrongful death lawsuit. Now you've got not one, but two federal laws. You've got all the awareness in the world that's out there. So getting into a solution is, there's just no reason why you shouldn't. And when you're looking at this, it's important to look at compliance and make a checklist, not just to determine what's required, but what you require for your environment. One size is not going to fit all solutions. Every building, every environment is like a snowflake. It's got these idiosyncrasies. But we went to the drawing board and developed one solution that was flexible, that can provide that no matter what you have. So first of all, we look at Kerrys Law compliance. Those were effective back on February 16th, 2020 for all new PBX systems or ones that were significantly upgraded after that date. In addition to that, they require that direct access is provided to 911. And fortunately, I'm really happy to see that we had 100% compliance, because Kerrys Law is about access. If Brianna had been able to reach 911, it's more than likely that Kari would be alive today. 4 coroners testified that Kari lived for 20 to 30 minutes. And we know that 911 wasn't called for almost 20 to 25 minutes. When they were finally called, EMS response to that motel was 4 minutes. And again, this is why that jury awarded what they awarded. 4-minute response time had 911 been able to be called, but it wasn't. On-site notification. Had Brianna dialed 911 and it didn't go through, a properly programmed system would have still reported that. 911 misdials are a huge, huge problem. People dialing 911 plus additional digits because they forgot the 0, they fat fingered it, or whatever. If you notify of those events, you can investigate them. You can stop the false 911 calls, but if it's something real, you know about it. That's what Kerrys Law was about, fixing that problem. And that notification has got to be to some device where it's likely to be seen. Baum's Act came after Kerrys Law. The law was actually signed 6 weeks after Kerrys Law was signed, but it took 2 additional years for Baum's Act to actually become effective. And that's because Baum's Act dealt with location discovery, which by all means, location is the most critical on a 911 call. But that's not what killed Kari. It was access. And I've been working on 911 legislation for a decade prior to Kari being murdered. And the number one thing that was tying up legislation was the complexity, the cost, and the difficulty to provide and report location. So what I tried to do with Kerrys Law is just get some legislation on the books, and legislation that could be additive later to add these things. So again, 6 weeks after Kerrys Law was signed, Baum's Act was signed, but a full 2 additional years before any of Baum's went into effect. And that's where you now have to provide what's called dispatchable location to the PSAP, the Public Safety Answer Point, the 911 Center, commonly referred to now as the Emergency Communications Center, or ECC. So when you hear PSAP, ECC, or 911 Center, they're all the same thing. Dispatchable location also needs to be delivered on site so that on-site resources understand, A, there was an emergency, where it happened, so they can start preparing, A, for public safety's arrival at the building, access control, etc. And if they've got the ability, they can provide assistance. Maybe they've got AEDs, a first aid kit. Maybe someone's trained. Even if someone's not trained, there's the Good Samaritan law that protects people from trying to help when they haven't been trained. And again, Kari lived for 20 to 30 minutes. Was there something somebody could do? Who knows? We'll never know. Baum's Act actually comes in two different phases. The first phase went into effect January 7th of this year, 2021. And that requires the dispatchable location to be delivered on systems that have wired telephony devices, digital, analog, wired VoIP sets. But what's important here, it went into effect on January 7th, but it applies to any system that was new or was upgraded back to that Kerrys Law date of Feb 16, 2020. It's just an additional requirement that was added as of January 7th. Still retroactive to last year. That's a point that a lot of people miss. Oh, well, I didn't buy a new PBX until January 1st. Well, you still have to apply to this. And the second part of this, phase 2, goes into effect on January 7th of next year, and that's where it's going to apply to wireless devices. If you're a healthcare facility with the Vocera badges, they've got to be compliant. If I've got Wi-Fi on a soft phone on a laptop, that has to be compliant. If I've got SpectraLink phones or some other wireless device, they now have to be compliant as of January 7th of next year. And I can tell you right now, there are some technologies out there that are going to be a challenge. So what does the law mean for my enterprise? This is part of the compliance assessment that you really need to have done. And this is not something you're going to learn in an hour. This is an interview on site, and we're going to show you how New Era can help you with that at no charge. But what you need to talk about, what you need to look at, is what is the law in detail. And then look at your current exposure. Much of the legislation is written in language that's sort of vague, and it was written vaguely on purpose, because when you look at square footage, which some states had, they called off specific square footages. That really doesn't make a lot of sense. Chicago was one of the first areas that had legislation back in, God, I think it was 1999 is when that legislation went into place. And they said 40,000 square foot maximum on a floor of a building. Well, at that time, I was working for a large financial that had a trader floor. You could go on the trading floor in Chicago, which was more than 40,000 square feet, and see the entire floor. And if you went into the back office area, that was probably less than 40,000 square feet. It was a nightmare maze of offices. So square footage doesn't make sense. It's also not consistent across the states. Some states call off 15, 12,000. I've seen 5,000, 7,000. Again, it's all about finding someone in a reasonable amount of time. And when you look at the definition of Ray Baum's Act, that's what a dispatchable location is. Number one, the verified street address of the building. Now, some of you said you've got multi-building campuses and you're not reporting the proper building or the building where the event is taking place. That's delaying response. Getting to the right facility, having someone there who understands where it's taking place and that can deal with access control to the building and guide people, that's what's really important. So you need to look at your environment to determine what your exposure is. What can you deploy in the building that provides relevant, actionable information? I go into a lot of buildings and I find a 50-inch flat screen monitor in the lobby, and it's showing the company picnic and the wonderful things that the company does for the public and new products that they've introduced. That TV screen is on the network. It's an addressable network endpoint. It's very easy to broadcast content on that screen. So one of the capabilities in our solution is to utilize that screen and flash a floor plan in an emergency. You are here, the emergency is here. So when you walk through the front door at 3 o'clock in the morning, you don't have to break down every single door to find somebody. You're here, you need to go here, you're going to break down these 3 doors. And this is the direction. So that's an important part of being compliant. You have to build out use cases for your environment. You know, I always say to people, do you have a factory that makes razor blades or do you make teddy bears? There's probably going to be a big difference in the number of 911 calls and the types of 911 calls that are going to happen. Do you have on-site resources that can be deployed? I mean, I know pharmaceutical companies, they've got a fire department on site, they've got a medical staff on site. Now, while they still can't intercept 911 calls, they certainly can be made aware of them and respond and establish a cohesive response with public safety. So it's about being compliant and being effectively compliant and dealing with the environments you have for your employees. And the number one question that drives me nuts, what if I don't do anything? Or what's the minimum that I have to do? So if you don't act, what I can tell you now is that you've got 2 federal laws on the books. Neither one of those has a penalty attached specifically. However, in the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, there's a blanket statement that has a $10,000 minimum fine for any CFR violation, and then another fine per day for noncompliance. So even though there's no penalty attached to that, there is a penalty at the federal level. If you look at New York City passed the New York City direct dial law, modeled after Kerrys Law. I testified in front of the city council. Took them a year, but they did pass that. It was the very first law that Mayor de Blasio signed when he came into office. And again, basically provides same thing as Kerrys Law, direct dial on-site notification. Simple. They have got part of that law that the fire marshal, based on a complaint, can charge you with that violation of the law, and they've got a per day penalty in addition to an overall fine. And those fines will rack up into the thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. But regardless if there is a penalty or not a penalty, again, I'll draw your attention to the Hunt family, who was awarded $41 million in a wrongful death lawsuit. That's a civil personal liability. And if that doesn't scare you, I'm really not sure, what should. The legacy 911 network, this is what it looks like at the 911 center. There's not a lot of information here. In the future seminars, we're going to show you what this means, how you control this, and what little information you can put in here. We're going to teach you about next generation 911, which looks more like this, but this doesn't mean expensive. This is just very modern and capable, and is actually more efficient and less expensive than today's solutions. So we're going to show you how to put this information on the interfaces that public safety sees. 80% of all 911 calls actually originate from cellular devices. 80%. Because of location challenges today, new technology exists that covers 93% of the population that actually increases the accuracy of these calls to about 3 feet. We're going to show you how to utilize feeds into that technology and what's called a geofence to segment your property so that when a 911 call happens, we're going to show you how to be notified of that. So we're going to go through the more you know section, and I'm going to kick it over to Jake to go over some myths that we commonly see and some of the actual facts of what exists out there.
Yeah, thanks, Fletch. So, a couple common myths. 911 centers, they receive exact locations of the 911 callers, correct, Fletch?
Well, you know what? That's probably the thing that most people believe. But actually, 911 centers are incredibly limited to the information that the enterprise provides to them. And it's actually the carrier that it's being provided to. So that very text-based 911 screen that I showed you, there is one single field that's 20 characters in length that the enterprise has available to describe the location of an emergency. And telling public safety that I'm in cube 2C231 doesn't really do anything because that's not understandable by a first responder.
So when the information goes to public safety, the PBX is what's transmitting that information, right?
Well, again, huge area of misunderstanding. The PBX actually transmits one thing, and that's caller ID. That's how 911 operates on the back end. So whatever caller ID is provided, that matches up just like a contact center at the 911 center. If I call United Airlines, they know it's me calling because they've got my caller ID and they do a lookup in the database. When you call 911, they look up the number in the database, and whatever record is associated with that phone number is the information that they get. And this is where the legacy 911 gets really expensive. If I've got 5,000 endpoints and I want to report 5,000 individual locations, I need 5,000 individual records. And those records cost money every month to manage, maintain, and you need a system that keeps them updated with new locations.
So the third-party apps will send location information.
Well, sort of. Those third-party apps do send information, but they actually don't send it to the PSAP. They actually send it to the database providers that are an intermediary. And the reason why that's important is because, let's say Jake moves his phone at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. By 12 o'clock, he's got his office moved, he's in his new location, and I've got technology in my network that says, oh, look, Jake moved to the 5th floor in this building, and I know he's in this cube. Great, I have all the information about Jake being moved. Most of the systems will hold that information for the remainder of the day, and Monday night, they'll submit that for change with all of the other people that moved. But it really doesn't matter. Even if it submitted that change when Jake initially moved, the database provider that's going to update the databases has to validate the record, make sure it's correct, make sure that you're allowed to update that record, and then include that record into their databases, which takes between 24 and 48 hours and potentially up to 72 hours. So now Jake's moved at 10 o'clock on a Monday. It might be Wednesday before his 911 database record is active. So even though I've got this application, it's sending data to the database provider because you can't send information directly to the PSAP in the legacy 911 environment.
So all of these PSAPs are connected across the country, correct?
You know what? That's what a lot of people believe, and that's what you'll see a lot in the movies. So the 911 infrastructure actually is very regionalized and it's siloed and isolated. Think of the old local area telephone access, the old LATAs. I could call a local area free of charge. Basically, those LATAs are the 911 service areas where 911 centers are regionalized. So little pockets. And in general, and again, this is in general, not by any means a hard rule, that area may be able to transfer PSAP to PSAP to PSAP. Very rarely can you transfer out of those areas. And unless a special arrangement has been made and the 911 center has actually put in a private network circuit, I've never seen two 911 centers across state lines be able to directly transfer. So I live in upstate New Jersey. I am 3 miles from the New York State border. Matter of fact, if I'm outside of my driveway on my cell phone 911 goes to New York State. If I'm in the house, the signal's not good enough, I usually hit a Jersey tower. There are tie lines between the 911 center in my town and the 911 center in the town just across the state line. Those 911 centers pay for those tie lines. They're really not part of the 911 network. They're just there because so many calls get misrouted across the border. This is important to understand if you're in a border area, or it's important to understand where these boundaries are, because if calls get misrouted, you're not going to get to the right 911 center, and people can't be properly transferred. Now, with COVID, people going home, you have to seriously consider this. We've got customers down in the Trenton area of New Jersey. A lot of people live in Philadelphia. I can't do anything for them if they've taken their voice over IP phone home using the legacy environments. So we have to make special considerations. This is really problematic. So you have to understand there is a huge discovery meeting that needs to take place. And this is why we broke this webinar into 3 specific segments. What we want to accomplish today is give you an overview of the complexity of 911 and then utilize the specialties of New Era in a sit-down face-to-face discussion where we can actually come in and not just say, here's the 911 box, sign here. No, let's see what you've got, what you need, and what needs to be applied. So I'm going to kick it back over to Joe, who's going to tell you about the 911 Inform discovery meeting that New Era is going to offer.
Thanks, Fletch. And I would add to that the previous slide. The intent of this meeting, as Fletch mentioned here, is we'll come in and do a discovery, evaluate your current situation, and from there, really talk about your use case, and lastly, provide a bill of materials if you desire to bring something like that to upper management for budget. But my observations with our clients to date in this topic has been sort of the myth fact was great. Different organizations have different levels of understanding of the compliance and legislation requirements. Some customers are really far down that road. Some are crossing their fingers, hoping that nothing's going to happen. I also find that within the organization itself, you'll have certain parties in certain groups of the company very well versed, trying to push an agenda ahead to get this completed, and other parts of that same company really starting at ground zero and having a hard time wrapping their hands around this process. So these meetings are great. We can bring together different parts of that organization, have everyone at a steady state, everyone's working from the same level of understanding so we can all move forward collectively and help your organization make a decision that makes sense for you folks. Fletch and Jake, anything that you would add to that? Just want to make sure, does that capture what we want to accomplish?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing that I want to add to that, Joe, is some of the best meetings that I have had are the company that is 80% of the way there. And after a meeting, we talk about a couple of tweaks that they can make in their software or their procedures, and they don't have to do anything. Because at the end of the day, we want to help companies be compliant. So we reduce and eliminate their liability. And I can't tell you how many people we just make some simple suggestions to, and they're good to go from there. And to me, those are the best meetings.
Yeah, that is great. On the survey that's going to come out after the webinar, there'll be some questions, and two of them I want to point out. One will be to have this discovery meeting, and the second, and maybe Jake, you can elaborate on this, an opportunity for you to receive a white paper / compliance checklist document. Jake, what have customers been using that for so far?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So typically what we see that document being used for is kind of go step by step internally, kind of relate it to your own scenarios and situations, to see if there's any additional questions that are raised, maybe confirm some of the things that you've been curious on. And it's really just a 10-15 question checklist that just sort of walks through what the requirements are, how it will apply to a specific organization. And if any of those are questionable, we can certainly assist in trying to get some answers for you.
Great, thank you. And again, folks, just indicate that on the survey. So moving forward, I mentioned at the very beginning that today's presentation was to try to hopefully bring us to a understanding of compliance legislation. Moving forward to the next session, we can see here, we'll start getting a deeper dive technically into what's happening. I've been through these meetings a number of times and have seen the product, so I recommend really making that commitment to attend. It's a good use of time. Fletch, anything, or Jake, would you add to what we want to cover next time?
So the next session, we're really going to focus on, obviously Fletch went through what the dispatchable location requirements are that come from Baum's. But the second, our second session will really focus on how we're accomplishing device location discovery and the processes behind that, and some of the methods that can be used within your network or some of the modules that 911 Inform provides to ensure that the information that's being sent to public safety is valid and useful to a response effort.
Great, thank you.
I think it's situational awareness and the usefulness of the information. Specificity is not always what's required from an emergency response. And I think one of the biggest challenges that enterprises have, and one of the biggest mistakes that they make, is they never involve or even ask local public safety, hey, what do you need if you have to come to my building? Because the things that you think public safety needs may be completely opposite to what they really need to establish an effective response. And a lot of people are afraid to interact or engage public safety because they think they're bothering them. But in reality, they're there to do a job. They're there to save your butt when you're having a problem. If you can provide them with better information that enables them to do their job better, they'll absolutely love you. So it's and sometimes it just takes somebody in the middle to make that introduction. Hi, public safety agency, meet ABC company. ABC company, meet public safety. Let's talk about how we can all work together to make a problem not be a problem.
Awesome, thank you. And Fletch, advance, I think we're approaching the end here. If you don't mind just going ahead here. Yeah, so as we wrap up, again, guys, Fletch and Jake, I can't thank you enough. This is an important topic. We've been meeting with clients together, and it resonates for everyone, and the fact that we can help put a plan in place is great. So on behalf of New Era, thank you once again for participating. And everyone who's attended today, thank you. And Fletch and Jake, anything else you want to wrap up with before we go?
Well, Joe, I just
Just
want to
one.
mention, I really want to thank the folks at New Era. I mean, I get to work with a lot of different channel partners across the board, and generally everybody does a great job. But you guys have really stood out on as a company that really took this seriously, and everybody got involved at every level to make sure that your customer base was well educated, well advised, and had every potential resource available to them to facilitate fixing this problem. And as most people know, I'm very, very close to the Hunt family. So on behalf of them, thank you very, very much for taking this important effort.
Thank you. With that, folks, thank you once again, and please register for the upcoming event. And if you have any questions that you didn't ask today, please reach out to your account rep or indicate so on the post-webinar survey. And with that, have a great day.